Welcome, my friends. As the flames flicker and shadows dance, let me share with you a tale that might just leave you with an uneasy feeling as you return home. Hush now, are you ready? Well, let's find out, shall we? I remember it like it was yesterday, and it still sends shivers down my spine. A young woman named Leah moved into a new apartment, excited to start fresh. The place was small but cozy, with just enough room for her and her few belongings. The building was old, with creaky floors and a draft that seemed to whisper secrets in the dead of night. Leah was a friendly person, always smiling and eager to make new friends. She quickly got to know most of her neighbors, exchanging pleasantries and casual conversation. But there was one neighbor who stood out, a man named Mr. Collins. He lived directly across the hall from her. Mr. Collins was a quiet, reclusive man. He rarely left his apartment, and when he did, it was only for short, odd hours. He was tall and thin, with pale skin that made him look almost ghostly. His eyes were always hidden behind thick glasses, and his voice was barely more than a whisper. At first, Leah didn't think much of him. She assumed he was just shy or maybe had some health issues. She tried to be friendly, greeting him whenever she saw him.
Mr. Collins. Hi, how was your day?
But he would only nod briefly and quickly disappear into his apartment. Despite his odd behavior, Leah didn't feel threatened. In fact, she felt a bit sorry for him, thinking he might be lonely. But then, strange things started happening. Leah began to notice Mr. Collins more and more, not just in the hallway but everywhere she went. If she went to the grocery store, he was there, standing a few aisles away, watching her. If she took a walk in the park, he was there, sitting on a bench, staring at her. It was unnerving, but Leah tried to brush it off as coincidence. After all, they lived in the same building. It wasn't impossible to run into him now and then. However, the coincidences became too frequent to ignore. One night, Leah was out with friends, enjoying dinner at a local restaurant. She glanced up from her plate and saw him, sitting alone at a table in the corner, his eyes fixed on her. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, and it began to invade her dreams. She would wake up in a cold sweat, certain that someone had been in her room, watching her as she slept. Leah's unease grew into fear, and she started to avoid leaving her apartment whenever possible. She installed extra locks on her doors and kept her windows tightly shut. But the feeling of being watched never left her. It was as if Mr. Collins had somehow found a way into her very soul. One evening, after a particularly restless night, Leah decided to confront Mr. Collins. She marched across the hall and knocked on his door. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time, but still nothing. Frustrated, she turned to leave when she noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pushed the door open. The apartment was dark and musty, filled with old furniture and stacks of newspapers. It looked like it hadn't been cleaned in years.
Hello? Anybody home? Mr. Collins, it's Leah.
She called out, but there was no response. Leah took a few steps inside, her heart pounding in her chest. As she ventured further, she noticed something strange on the floor. Scratches, as if something heavy had been dragged across the wooden boards.
What happened here?
She followed the marks, which led her to a large shelf against the far wall. Something about the shelf seemed off, and she reached out to touch it. To her surprise, it swung open, revealing a hidden passage. Leah's heart raced as she stared into the dark corridor. She should have turned back, called the police, done anything but go inside. But something compelled her to step forward, her fear overridden by a desperate need for answers. The passage was narrow and claustrophobic, the air thick with dust. She could barely see a few feet in front of her as she made her way deeper into the darkness. Her mind raced with terrifying possibilities. What if Mr. Collins was down here? What if he was watching her right now? Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her, a soft, shuffling sound. She spun around, but there was nothing there. She was about to turn back when she felt a cold hand on her shoulder. She opened her mouth to scream, but another hand clamped over her mouth, silencing her. A sharp blade pressed against her throat. It was Mr. Collins. His face was twisted into a sickening grin, and his eyes gleamed with a mad light.
"Welcome, Leah. I've been waiting for you."
Leah's fear paralyzed her as Mr. Collins dragged her further into the passage, the knife never leaving her throat. She didn't dare struggle, knowing any sudden movement could end her life. Finally, they reached a small, dimly lit room. The walls were lined with old photographs and strange symbols. In the center of the room was a makeshift bed, surrounded by piles of food and water bottles. It was clear that Mr. Collins had been living here for a long time.
Why are you doing this?
Leah cried, tears streaming down her face. Mr. Collins leaned in close, his breath hot and foul against her skin.
"You were special, Leah. I knew it the moment I saw you. I've been watching you, protecting you. And now, we can be together, forever."
He locked her in the room, sealing the door with a heavy chain. Leah banged on the door, screamed for help, but it was no use. Days turned into weeks, and she realized with growing horror that no one would come to save her. She was trapped in the dark, with only Mr. Collins' twisted affection for company. As her hope faded, Leah discovered something even more disturbing. Behind a loose panel in the wall, she found a journal. It was filled with Mr. Collins' deranged writings, detailed accounts of his obsession with her, plans for their life together, and chilling entries about previous victims. Leah's hands trembled as she flipped through the pages of the journal. The first few entries seemed almost innocent, detailing Mr. Collins' daily routine, but as she read on, the tone became increasingly disturbing.
June 5th, I saw her today. The new girl in 3B. She smiled at me in the hallway. Such a beautiful smile. I must protect her, keep her safe. June 12th, I followed her to the grocery store. She bought apples and milk. She doesn't know how vulnerable she is. But I will keep her safe. June 20th, she went to the park today. I sat on the bench, watched her from a distance. She is perfect. I must have her.
As she continued reading, Leah found detailed notes about other women, each entry more sinister than the last.
July 25th, Sarah was too weak. She didn't last long. But Leah, she is different. She is strong. She will be mine forever.
The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't the first. Leah's eyes darted to the walls, recognizing the faces in the photographs. They were the previous victims, each one marked with a date. Her blood ran cold as she noticed something else, small, disturbing keepsakes hidden in various corners of the room. Locks of hair tied with ribbons, fingernails meticulously arranged in tiny boxes, and even pieces of clothing stained with blood. Each item was a grim trophy, a testament to Mr. Collins' twisted mind. Desperate and terrified, Leah knew she had to escape. She couldn't let Mr. Collins' fantasy become her reality. She waited for him to leave, biding her time, planning her escape. When she finally heard the door creak open, she was ready. With a surge of adrenaline, she lunged at Mr. Collins, catching him off guard. They struggled, and for a moment it seemed like she might overpower him.
Let me go!
But he was too strong, and with a sickening thud, he knocked her to the ground. As Leah lay there, dazed and bleeding, Mr. Collins leaned over her, his grin wider than ever.
Don't worry, Leah. We'll be together forever.
And as the darkness closed in, Leah realized with chilling clarity that she would never leave this place. She was just another victim, lost to the madness of Mr. Collins, trapped in the shadows, forever. So, my friends, as you leave tonight, remember this tale of Leah and Mr. Collins. And as you walk home, be sure to check the shadows, for you never know who might be watching. Hush now, be careful.